Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth Everlaw Summit, our third in-person summit. It's going to be a great few days here. Some conferences are really big. We like to think Everlaw Summit is much more intimate. We want you to get to know folks. I know I get inspired meeting all of you, and I encourage you to sit with other folks as you've been doing today to learn from each other and meet new folks. So it's really exciting to see that. Last year, I talked about how we just launched our beta of Everlaw AI Assistant, and we've spent this past year learning from many of you and iterating on it. So earlier this month, we released an AI Assistant into general availability. I want to share what we learned, why we made some of the decisions we did, and then I want to get really practical with some demos of the tool. And I'll be joined by a few customers to talk about their experiences as well. Now, we have a ton of other exciting product improvements to talk about. So stay tuned for the product deep dive that will happen after my session. GenAI is really important, and we want to make sure you're up to speed on it, but it's not the only thing, right? And so there's a lot more to offer here that we want to talk about. So here's how we see things going with GenAI a year in, right? So first, we do continue to believe that GenAI will have a lasting and profound impact on our industry. It's going to change litigation, but it's not going to replace practitioners. It's going to significantly alter the interaction paradigm, how they work. And it's not going to be one killer feature that you consult. It's going to be integrated into everything from review to story building. Fundamentally, there's going to be a massive competitive advantage for people who use it, right? To finding better needles in the haystack faster, and then enabling your case leads to tell more powerful stories, leading to better outcomes for you or your clients. It also has to be done responsibly. So one observation in the past year, we've now seen this technology out in the wild, and we know that GenAI adoption is happening really fast, roughly 5 times faster than cloud adoption in our industry. So when we look at the surveys, just a year and a half after the launch of ChatGPT, more than a third of legal respondents are currently using GenAI in their practice, 17% on actual active live matters, and another 16% on some form of beta testing. Now, if you look at this rapid uptake and contrast it to cloud adoption and e-discovery, there's a significant difference. So we look at the 2021 survey, cloud adoption of e-discovery, 10 years into the availability of that technology, only 37% of respondents were using the cloud in some capacity after 10 years, which is about where we are with GenAI after 18 or 24 months. So it's wild to see that. It's really apparent to see how quick this adoption is happening. And earlier this month, we also released another study with the Association of Corporate Counsels, and we learned a couple things there as well. For in-house counsel teams, nearly half of respondents say GenAI will significantly increase legal teams' effectiveness. And another 11% anticipate a fundamental shift in the nature of their work. So we can clearly see the potential here, as others do, right? But what about that responsibly part? How do we ensure that you, our users, can get value from GenAI while mitigating some of the risks? So I want to talk about how we approach this problem and some of the foundational principles we built into our product experiences as a result. It's helpful to know that we actually have a core philosophy at Everlaw. So this is true. So it's in a document we give to every applicant to the company along with their offer. So if they get to that final stage, we give an offer. We say, this is also who we are. And the philosophy is something that we come back to all across the company time and again. And it's really simple. It's basically make decisions that yield the best long-term outcomes. And the formula here is just integrity and discipline. Do the right thing and do it the right way. That simple. And this really impacts how we market, how we sell Everlaw, how we support the platform, and how we develop it. Here, it means being really intentional about developing our GenAI tools, right, our solutions. We want to devise some principles to anchor it, and we've run a year-long beta to really ensure that we're iterating on it to bring something of value to you. Ultimately, we know that generative AI is here to stay. We know it's durable technology. We think it's much better in that regard to be best at this rather than just being first. It turns out we were also first anyway in a couple of regards. That's great. That didn't hurt. But our focus is really on how do we make the best technology for you. And so when we look at our AI principles here, the first two, which I released these last year, and it's funny, is like the first two have very quickly become, in my mind, table stakes. That's a great thing, which means that you can get these things if you know where to look at companies like Everlaw and other companies. So when we talk about privacy and security, we're talking about ensuring that the generative AI model providers are going through the same robust security and vendor analysis, but also that we ensure that they apply zero data retention to your data, which means that when you send data to them, they're not allowed to store it for any reason past when they've answered your query. as well as no training. They can't use the data to train their models in any way. And so ultimately, that part you can just get now contractually with a company like Everlaw. On the control side, what we want to make sure that you have is control over your usage of the tool, right? Visibility into what projects can access and control over which projects get access to it, which specific features you use, which of your users can use the tool. Your users should always know when they're using GenAI. We'll tell you what models we use. We want you to have that kind of transparency and control in your interactions here so you can best devise how to use the tool. Now, the third bit is the hardest one, right? How do we ensure you have confidence in using this tool? We know GenAI can provide immense value, but it can also make mistakes, right? We all know about the potential for so-called hallucinations. We want to ensure that our users can develop confidence in the usage of GenAI on Everlaw so they can get the most value from it. So let's talk more in depth about how we enable confidence in our generative AI solutions. It's not actually simple. It turns out it requires a tiered approach. We have to do many things in concert. And I want to tell you a little bit about how we think about this. So the first thing we do is that we design experiences that play to the strengths of large language models and, to the extent possible, avoid their weaknesses. So here we focus on use cases where large language models have reliable innate capabilities, things like natural language fluency, creativity, even some reasoning. But we're really wary of the LLM's innate knowledge of the law. LLMs store information statistically, so when you construct outputs, there's some chance that the information that it's putting out is going to get recreated incorrectly. And this is especially true with very precise questions for which there may not be a lot of training data. High-stakes questions, questions like we might have in the law. And you can never be sure in those cases the answer is going to be correct. And that's how hallucinations occur. And we've seen some embarrassing examples, right, of these hallucinations in the legal world, right, made up case names and so on. We don't want your legal teams getting into that kind of trouble. So we stay away from embedded knowledge of the law and instead create experiences that rely on the four corners of the documents at hand, your evidence that we can provide at the time of query, not during training, and we feed directly to the model for you. And that makes a far more reliable experience. Now, the second component of building confidence is to embed these GenAI experiences into existing workflows. And there's two main benefits to doing this, right? What the alternative might be is something you might have interacted with a chatbot you go to ask very open-ended questions where you provide some information and context and it does something for you. That's the alternative. We don't think that's a great solution to get high confidence experiences. When you have embedded experiences in your workflows, one main benefit is you have really precise use cases, right? We're really targeting a particular part of your workflow we want to solve well. And that means that we don't have to have users learning how to prompt engineer to get what they want. They basically will just, in many cases, just click a button. And we've done the work for that precise use case to ensure it's going to be reliable, right? And they don't have to understand the specifics of the task to get the value, right? This ensures that the range of inputs and outputs is smaller and more reliable. The second big part of having embedded workflow use cases is that we get to provide all the context that's needed to answer the question. So providing context is a big part of using a GenAI experience. If you go to ChatGPT, you can ask it some general purpose knowledge questions, but if you need it to solve a problem for you, you often have to tell it some things, upload some documents, right? And you may not provide the right documents. It's probably insecure the way you're downloading and uploading documents. It's inconvenient, right? Those are problems. When we put these experiences right into the workflows that you already have, we provide exactly all the context that you need. And that allows for better quality outputs and more reliable outputs and more secure interaction. So together, being able to have precise use cases and having all the context you need allows for protective guardrails, right, and higher quality outputs. So if you look at our use cases today, you'll see that they're all embedded right inside the platform. They target specific workflows. Often you just have to click a button, and we provide all the necessary context for you. Now, the third thing is changing your mental model. And this is not something we can do. This is something you actually have to do yourself. And it's a big deal. What you basically have to do is think about using a computer a little bit differently from how we've all been trained to do for many, many years, right? You have to move from an interaction model where you have very repeatable interactions that are also largely inflexible, like a calculator, to a variable interactions where things might be a little different, but it's highly flexible. It's much more like a human, right? You need to get used to the idea that the computer is capable of a lot more, but it can also make mistakes. So we think about this like it's a smart intern, right? Really capable, really hardworking, still an intern, still might make some mistakes, right? And so you need to learn what the intern is capable of over time and determine your own personal comfort level with its capabilities, and then check the work in the meanwhile, right? So in this new world, it's neither good to just blindly trust the output of a GenAI tool, nor is it good to just say, hey, like one mistake and it's out, it's unreliable. It's in between. It's like a person. And that's a fundamental shift in, I think, how we want you to think about these tools. Now, you might ask, well, how do I check my work? How do I build confidence in that intern when you have this mental model? Well, when you work with an actual intern, you check their work, right? By checking their work, you learn what they're good at and what they're not good at. And so all of our AI tools ensure that it's really easy for you to check the AI's work. Our answers will cite specific passages in a document or specific documents when you're looking at many documents at once. And so you can check that work. So as you verify Everlaw AI, you'll find tasks that it's so reliable at or for which the stakes are so low, you don't need to check its work anymore. You can just start using it. You'll find other tasks where it's really useful for a first pass, but then you want to consume that output and make it your own and iterate on it. And you might find other tasks where you just don't feel comfortable using it at all, and that's okay. All of those interactions are fine. We think about GenAI as a tool, as we do all the other technical tools we provide you. And this process allows you to figure out how and when to use it best. So with this approach in hand, we designed our experiences for this beta. We focused on GenAI strengths and the four corners of your documents. We embedded these use cases in Everlaw workflows with precise use cases and context at hand with easily verifiable outputs. And we wanted to work with you and your users to ensure that they would think about these tools as if they're working with an intern. So this is how we set up the beta, and it's been running now for over a year. And in that year, we had almost 200 organizations enrolled. We had about 500 databases and active users testing the system. We had over 5,000 bits of feedback those users provided, which were invaluable in iterating on the product. And we did make over 40 improvements to these functionalities over the past year, with over 100 developer months spent on this tool. And we've learned a lot in this time, so I want to chat about that. So when we started, we put out some base functionality. And we've iterated on each feature many, many times, refining the user experience to better provide value and to avoid pitfalls. So for instance, here's our AI writing assistant kind of before and after. Initially, it was really open-ended. The results were inconsistent, and users struggled to learn how to use the tool. Now it's much more structured, right? With preset templates, with preset output formats and question types, users can get immediate value from it. Right? This is one of the many ways we evolved during the beta, learning from all of you to deliver a much better product. We've made similar improvements to our review and our batch tools to simplify them and enhance their usefulness. So I just want to say a huge thank you to our beta users. I hope many of them are in this room even. You made a huge impact on the development of this experience. So let's talk about some of the ways these features are being used in the wild by Everlaw users on live data. So there's so many different workflows you can apply AI Assistant to. Today I just want to focus on two. First pass review and story building. I'll cover a bit about each. I'll cover a bit about the current workflows and the pain points. And then I'll discuss how AI Assistant can help. And I'll invite some of our customers out to talk about their specific uses of AI Assistant at their organizations. So first pass review, right? Document review on large document sets is a core part of what many of you all do. We've provided in the Everlaw platform so many ways to simplify the process and find relevant and responsive documents faster. So with AI Assistant, we feel we can help you complete those initial review steps even faster and more accurately. So often, one early step is you receive a new assignment or receive a new data set and a document set. You want to understand what's in it, right? Are there interesting documents or insights? What's this thing about? Prior to Everlaw AI Assistant, reviewing and profiling a document set was a more manual process. Now, obviously, we have a lot of great features to help, but it still would require you to devote hours or even days to review. So our AI batch summarization and topic analysis features can speed your work in this scenario. You can quickly generate document summaries for tens of thousands of documents at a time, generate topic extractions, and you can view them in the results table. So you can actually skim these documents and scan through them to get a sense of the data set, maybe even find some critical documents along the way. The next common step, of course, is applying codes to these documents, conducting first pass review for a large document set. So obviously, we think our existing tools really help improve that process with things like predictive coding and coding presets and so many other features in the platform. But we're always seeking new ways to help reduce the time and expense. And we do believe that coding suggestions can be a great additional tool leveraging GenAI in this workflow. So how coding suggestions works is it suggests whether code should be applied to a document based on instructions really similar to what you'd provide to human reviewers, right? It evaluates each document individually based on those instructions, which is quite different from predictive coding. It also has a richer semantic understanding of the context of each document, which allows for a unique insight, like a human, potentially beyond what predictive coding could provide by itself. So also, unlike predictive coding, coding suggestions provide rationales for its coding decisions. It'll actually explain why it suggested a particular code, and it'll cite back to the source document, particular snippets of text that support its point of view. And that allows you to verify its results really quickly and understand why it made specific choices. One thing you can do is you can run coding suggestions on individual documents, and you can also run it in batch, right? Again, up to 20,000 documents at a time. And once those suggestions are created, you can actually search on them, you can filter on them, you can organize your review around these suggestions. And let's do a quick demo of coding suggestions. Here we go. So this is Everlaw. I'm live on the platform here. This is a case about a consulting firm that consulted on opioids. It's a public set of documents here. Let's imagine in this use case we've been given some kind of request, right? We have to produce some documents. We've been given specific topics we have to evaluate our documents by. We've set up our coding sheet here. You can see the 6 topics that we care about. Now, normally you just go and assign these out to your review team and get them to work on this. But with Everlaw AI, what you can do is actually tell the assistant about these coding topics so the suggestions tool can work. The way you configure the AI is you tell it about the case, and then you tell it about your categories, and you tell it about your codes. And you do this with natural language, the way you might instruct your review team with a coding rubric. One thing to keep in mind, though, is when you're talking to the AI is you don't want to assume it knows anything. You should explain everything you need to explain. You should expand acronyms and so on so that it actually knows all the particular relevant terms of art and so on in the space you're in. But once you do this, you can now have the coding suggestions get to work. And I can run them here on this set of, let's say, set of documents. You can run it on, again, tens of thousands, but I'm going to pick a small set so we can see it for the demo. I'll run my coding suggestions tool here. I'm going to generate these suggestions for these documents here. And it's going to go out. It's going to batch them out. It's going to run through many, many documents here. And you can see actually some of the code starting to populate as it goes through this list. And it's going to go do all the documents in this set here. So you can see it's filling in some. I can pick one and just show you while it's running on the rest, but it'll go and evaluate these documents. So if I look at this document here, this is a spreadsheet. And I can bring up my coding panel here. And what it's done for me is it's actually looked at all the codes I told it about and made its suggestions for each of them, right? It can say, yes, I think the code should be applied. It can say soft yes, I'm pretty sure, but you might want to check this, or a soft no, probably not, but you might want to check it, or a hard no, right? And we give you this range, a little bit more nuance than just a binary yes, no, so that you can organize your review around what you're trying to do. If you care a lot about precision, just absolutely making sure the documents you find are really relevant, you can just focus on the hard yeses. If you care more about recall and casting a wide net, you can include the soft yeses, maybe even the soft no's, right? Or you can just draw the line right in the middle. But for each of these things, you'll see that it actually provides an explanation for why it thinks the code should be applied. Now, I don't know if you can read this text here. Financial analyses and reports is the first one. The document contains detailed financial analyses and projections for Targanic ER, including profitability, et cetera, et cetera. So it's explaining why that code should be applied, and you can actually jump to the relevant area of the document. You can see here this is a slide that has a bunch of financial information on it, right? Or marketing and sales strategy, right? Launch strategies for this drug, right? So you can kind of see and validate the information. And you can do this individually, and you can apply these codes right in line, right? It's integrated into your workflow. It's in your review window. It allows you to use all the normal review tools you might use, but also implement and incorporate the suggestions that it has. And what this allows you to do, of course, is run it wholesale, but also to refine and iterate the prompts you're giving it, right? The context you're providing. Sometimes you weren't providing the right context. It doesn't know enough. You run this on small batches. You iterate on the context you provide. Its results improve, and then you can kind of run it on a larger scale. So really exciting to see this kind of technology just being integrated, we think, into the platform itself. So we actually conducted an experiment pitting coding suggestions against first-pass human reviewers across 4 e-discovery data sets. They're all part of active civil litigation matters involving a broad range of formats, PDFs and emails, spreadsheets, calendar files, text files, and so on. So in the test, we interviewed folks about the case, and we also we looked at the provided review protocols, and then we created that initial set of context, the information we provide to the coding suggestions tool about the matter for each of the cases. And so the top line results demonstrate that coding suggestions performs as well as initial human review, and in one case, 36% better, right? It actually can do as well or better than people. And that shows that, as a legal professional, you can reasonably rely on coding suggestions to help you prioritize and classify your documents and reduce the workload associated with these manual processes. However, it must be said, coding suggestions performance is affected by a variety of factors, right? The particular codes you're asking it to evaluate, right? How subtle or nuanced are they? What quality of context did you provide? Did you provide sufficient context for the tool to do its work? So when you actually implement it, it could do worse, it could do better. You have to actually keep your eyes open and think about this, right? So let's speak with an expert who's used coding suggestions in practice. Cal, come on up. All right, awesome. Welcome, Cal. Great to have you join us today. Before we jump in, could you tell folks about yourself and your firm?
Yeah, so hey, everybody. Cal Yeaman, project attorney at Org Analytics. Combination of working with tech, innovation, e-discovery, really. Specific conversation today, generative AI, right?
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for all the feedback you and the team gave us. Org has been really, really helpful in building a great tool through the beta program. So I'm excited to chat a bit about how you use coding suggestions on an active matter. So could you provide some context for the case, how many documents, what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so I was brought in to help our IP litigation team support on a patent infringement claim. Traditionally, these matters are really difficult to work with a managed review because you need a dual set of expertise, right? You need to have the knowledge for the underlying subject matter in addition to the knowledge for managing the review, right? So frequently what that means is these cases end up being more expensive because you have increased QC time or you have increased time with the managing associate on the matter, right? So increased billables. After several meet and confers and back and forth, you ended up with a population, in this case, something around 10,500 documents, right? So what I wanted to do here on this particular case was do a combination review of predictive coding and generative AI to try and work one against the other to the benefit, right? The idea being that the floor for the case would be utilizing the generative AI tools to speed up the sampling process for predictive coding. The ceiling being that you could use the predictive coding to backbone and validate the work of the generative AI.
Yeah, so tell us more about the approach and the process you took.
Yeah, so I think to back up a little bit, it's helpful to frame the culture of the firm a little bit, right? Org is pretty tech forward and innovation forward. We have a long history for it, from our hackathons, investment and involvement with Altaclaro. It sort of is part of the culture of the firm, right? As generative AI, ChatGPT started really hitting the scene, our associates were encouraged to write limericks, to ask how many R's are in strawberry, right? These kinds of questions. We waited and assessed and analyzed, and as soon as these tools were ready to be used on client matters, we jumped in. Everlaw was no exception to that. I think that's true, though, of not just Org, but many people in the industry. That's true of what we did with TAR 1.0, TAR 2.0, email threading. This is just the latest iteration of that, right? So I think what's critical in that is choosing which tools to assess and analyze and work with and having a partner that you can work with, right? I think in that respect, Org and Everlaw have good culture value and a good fit in that way. So to back up, to zero in on getting back concretely to the matter, when you set up a traditional predictive coding model, right, in Everlaw, you have a 200 document sample, 50 documents that are relevant, 50 documents that are not relevant, and that seeds a predictive coding model that is continuously updated as you go, right? In a generative AI review, I think you just went over some of the basics of how that might work. What I did in this case is I supplanted the 200 document sample for the predictive coding model with a 95.5 stat sample based on the size of the case, okay? And then that was the validation richness sample for the generative AI. That was also the seed sample for predictive coding model. I also created essentially a TAR model in the workspace by using a static coding tag pegged to the coding suggestions for the generative AI. So to the extent the generative AI contrasted in the initial stages with the assessment of the managing associate or the partner, that static tag allowed us to track drift between the two models. So as we coded the prompt suggestions for the models, right, I ran 250 document microsamples to start with to cite in or zero in the coding suggestions, and that's a really critical key point. This is a much more organic and iterative process than a traditional TAR case would be, right? So you're going to need to do that multiple times. I'd highly encourage people using these tools to do so in a small sample set, particularly if you get into the documents a little bit early, sort of look around and see what you're working with and identify certain specific documents to iterate on so that you know what you're working with, right? After that, we ran our 95.5 richness sample. We assessed that. Once our case team was comfortable with the nature of the coding suggestions and that they were accurately returning what we wanted, we applied those coding suggestions on that sample set and then ran the coding suggestions over the larger review set. We then ran two 95.5 sample sets for the two different predictive coding models, the static TAR set and then the predictive coding model for just the regular CAL. We then finally ran our privilege screens. QC, one of the QCs that I did, and I would encourage everybody to do the same, would be the contrast and comparison between the coding suggestions and also the ranking scores of the two different models.
So I know you expressed some perfectly reasonable skepticism coming in about, hey, could this do as well as, first pass reviewer person? Tell us more about the outcomes, both the objective measurements and the subjective experience of using the tool.
Yeah, so I was a little skeptical going in, right?
Right, totally.
I wondered whether or not the tool could keep up with sort of the analysis or level of nuance of a human, or whether or not it could be as consistent as predictive coding. I was surprised to find that the generative AI coding suggestions were more accurate than human review by a statistically significant margin. That's going to vary from matter to matter, I think. That's going to depend on the criteria of your review, the nature of your case, the subject matter underneath. The more subject matter expertise is required, the more it's going to favor something like the generative AI model. The more linear the analysis is in nature, even if complex, the more it's going to benefit the generative AI model. The more sort of squishy or nuanced the analysis is, if this then that, but not this then that, right? That's going to make it difficult for the model to assess. But to be fair, that's also difficult for first level review, and that increases QC, right? So objectively though, a key factor that came up during the course of this review was the consistency of the model. If it was consistently right, it was right the whole way through. If it was wrong, it was consistently wrong the whole way through, right? So that reduced the QC on the back end. Subjectively, I think that it was easier to run a generative AI case in the sort of targeted small-scale review with managing associate, partner, myself, than it would be to run predictive coding, because there's much more nuanced reasoning with the assessment of the tools. Also, you have the coding suggestions, the document summaries. It allowed us to much more quickly assess the sampling of the population. It sped up how quickly we're able to get that done. And once you get to that point, I mean, instead of working, let's say it's a 95.2 sample and you're working, 1,200 documents, 1,500 documents, or whatever it is for your population. Instead of having managing associate wasting their billable hour time working through that sample with their subject matter expertise, right, document by document, this is garbage, this is gold. You have somebody instead using their critical analysis over documents that are already assessed, getting it done in a fraction of the time, and then giving you the information you need to be able to assess the population properly. And that's really something that's important too, is that generative AI work product, 2, 3, 4 minutes tops, right? We had the 10,500 document population was 2 tranches of review. The second tranche of review, by the time I got done, including privilege analysis, 3 hours, right? And that was 4,000 documents, 5,000 documents. So that was pretty great.
Yeah, great work.
So, I mean, the bottom line, right? Much as with prior technological advances, new tools bring new efficiencies, right? That's what we were just talking about. Raw linear review is less efficient than threaded email reviews, less efficient than TARs, less efficient than CAL, right? This is the same next step in my personal view. So what does that mean for this particular review? Let's assume when I'm saying review for, like a managed human review, we're talking about an optimized review. It's been threaded, you've had search terms applied, you've had near duplicate analysis, you've had it ranked for richness and associated and sorted, right? But you're not doing a cutoff, a prioritized review, right? I ran the numbers. Let's say you're being inefficient with the generative AI and you're running it across the entirety of the population and you're running it 4 or 5 times at cost, right? I mean, it was less than half the cost of what it would have been for a managed review for our rates. It was less than 20% of what it would have cost if I was to do it on sort of a targeted basis with me. It was less than 5% of what it would cost with a managing associate. And recall, this was an IP litigation case where you need the subject matter expertise of the managing associate. So it was a massive savings to the client. So, I mean, I think something else that's really important is how accurate we found the model to be. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how cheap it is if it can't do the job, right? Of all the documents that were suggested to be not relevant by the model, there was a single document that the managing partner on the case decided was relevant. That document was a lesser inclusive email that was otherwise wholly represented in the production population, right? I thought that was pretty solid. Something else I thought was highly impressive was the privilege. This is where I thought the model was going to be the weakest. In this particular case, the managing partner on the case was one of the relationship partners for the client, and there were 2 partners. And the underlying subject matter, there was an email sent by a relationship partner to the client. The client responded, right? Partner's name is Joe. So the client said, hey, Joe, blah, 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 patent 123, right? It's all about patents. They're talking about patents all the time. Sometimes that's privileged internally to the client. Sometimes it's not. The client copied that response, lifted it into a new email, and pasted it internally, right? There's no indication that that was an email to an attorney. There's no indication that's necessarily privileged, nothing in the metadata, no nothing. The only reason we knew that it was privileged was the partner on the case for the e-discovery portion happened to be on the original chain. So we're like, hey, red flag, we got to figure this out, right? So I crafted a generative prompt as part of the regular privilege tag to try and catch the first name analysis. No dice, didn't work at all. Maybe 15, 20% of the time it hit. I took that out and I did that as a novel tag and it hit everything. It hit the emails, memos, board meeting minutes, whatever. Not only that, it caught outside counsels we weren't aware of, their first names. It caught org attorneys who moved to other outside counsel firms and were like, hey guys, I don't represent you anymore, blah, blah, blah. We were finding things in our final privilege screen analysis that the model had already caught at the beginning of the review.
That's wild. Any other observations or trends you saw?
Yeah, I think something that I thought was really interesting is for the majority of documents, majority of the time, everything was really closely aligned. I'd say the predictive coding models and the coding suggestions were within 5 to 10% of each other. The ranking suggestions were within 5 to 10%. Some of them sharply contrasted. Some of that, I think, came down to the initial sampling where the model suggested X, the managing partner or the managing associate said, no, it's Y, right? And then we had that static coding drift that I talked about at the beginning. And that makes sense. However, there was also some sharp contrast between the generative AI coding suggestions and the machine learning models, both of them. Every single time there was a sharp contrast between those two, let's say the documents were ranked incredibly low by the machine learning models, but it ranked high and suggested as relevant by the coding suggestions. 10 times out of 10, the partner assessing it or the managing associate assessing it said that document's relevant. So there's something, and those documents tended to be something that needed some sort of heuristic reasoning, right? You need some sort of nuance to the reasoning. And I don't know the exact gunnings of how that works, but it reasons a little bit more like a human would in terms of like how it appears. So my takeaway from that is that it's a double-edged sword, and it's a very powerful tool. It's a good example of garbage in, garbage out. And you need to make sure that your coding criteria is tight and is not too nuanced, because otherwise you're going to get strong drift that's going to be hard to correct for.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Can you, I mean, you've gone through this process now. Do you mind sharing any just retrospective lessons learned about that you share with other people if they're going on this journey here?
Yeah, 100%. If you're starting down this road, I would start with experimenting on the data from a closed matter, but I would not pick a simple matter. I would pick a complex or rich matter. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean something that has varied document types and extensions. So metadata-wise, a complex matter, but also substantive content-wise, a complex matter. When we started experimenting, we had a very cut and dry case that was just nothing but contracts, and we didn't get a lot of good usable information on that first case. We didn't start getting great information and learnings and wisdom or whatever until we started experimenting with more different varied kinds of cases. Definitely spend a little time just poking around and getting to know your document population before you start microsampling or crafting your prompt generation. Pick and identify certain documents to seed into that sample. That way you know certain target documents to ID and to iterate upon. On that point, microsampling. You need to do that before you start doing your statistical sampling for richness, illusion, null set, what have you. The microsampling is key. This is an iterative, organic kind of process as compared to TAR 1.0 or CAL. And then I would also try and utilize different kinds of different kinds of issue analysis, right? So relevance, privilege, hot or key, some sort of semantic analysis, right? Give it different kinds of things to analyze in different kinds of ways and try and break it, right? See how it works, see how it doesn't work, where does it stand up, where does it fall down, and then try and figure out why.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate the insight, Cal. All righty. Yeah, really fascinating story from a obviously very skilled practitioner who's seen a lot of things. So a lot to learn there. So let's talk about another valuable use case, story building, right? So as you move towards the more strategic aspects of litigation, story building becomes really important, right? Things like building a narrative, preparing for a deposition, extracting facts, analyzing patterns and gaps, right? And brainstorming questions and strategy. So this is work driven by human judgment, expertise, intuition. The AI assistant can be a partner for you through this process, helping to streamline more manual research and analysis tasks and suggesting interesting ways to analyze or narrate your facts. So instead of spending hours organizing or cross-referencing information across dozens of documents, you can leverage our writing assistant to create usable analyses in a matter of minutes, keeping you in a productive flow and saving time and energy for higher value strategic work. So we're seeing a huge range of use cases with Writing Assistant, and I'm not going to have time to review all of them today, but I wanted to highlight one specific area around depositions, both in preparation for a deposition and then analyzing the transcript. Right? So for example, with a depo, you often have a few dozen documents related to a deponent identified over the course of review. If you add these documents to a storyboard deposition, they can easily be referenced by the writing assistant. You can then ask the writing assistant to brainstorm on a list of potential questions to ask at a deposition. Or, once the depo is complete and you've uploaded the transcript, you can use the depo analyzer to summarize and analyze these transcripts. So we have a few preset options here. We can summarize the deponent background in a topic-based summary. You can do an exhibit and witness summary. You can also look for inconsistencies and discrepancies in the testimony here. Or, of course, you can create your own custom task. So let me show you a quick demo of how this looks like here. One sec, I'm going to have to log in again. Here we go. All right, so this is Story Builder, right? This is the place where you're not finding needles in haystacks, you're taking the needles you found and building a story. And there's a whole timeline functionality, there's all kinds of things you can do here, but let's focus on depositions, right? So here we have this Harbaugh deposition. This is, again, this case about opioids and consulting in selling opioids. Let's say we're deposing this person tomorrow. I might start preparing, or hopefully not tomorrow. Maybe I'm a big procrastinator, but some weeks in advance, but let's just say it's tomorrow. I mean, whatever it might be, this is where these tools can really help accelerate your work, right? So I can do this myself, or I can get people to help me, or I can go to the assistant and say, hey, look, let me look at the 40 or so documents I've added to this depo as potentially relevant for this deponent, and let me create, let's just say, a list of what I want to do here. What questions can I ask Harbaugh in the deposition, right? And again, there's a lot of ways to do this, but the system is going to look at the document, try to understand what's relevant, and then brainstorm with you, right? Ideate, provide you a starting point, right? So looking at the data, looking at what it's learned about Harbaugh, it can start doing this for you, right? And you can see here it's got this list of potential questions. It's also citing specific documents, so you know what it's referencing and why these things might be interesting. And then if you like it, you can, of course, just insert this straight away into the story builder draft for your deposition. And again, each of these are actual documents, and you can view them just like you could any story builder documents in Everlaw and understand what's going on here. So this is a pre-deposition opportunity to really help brainstorm and synthesize what's potentially a lot of information, right? It's not going to maybe do the most comprehensive job, but it's going to really help you get started. Think of a couple things you didn't notice, and that can be really, really valuable as an ideation partner. Now, the other thing you can do is, let's say you've actually uploaded a transcript. You've completed the deposition. Now you want to understand what's going on, right? And so this can be a really tedious process, kind of writing that summary on the plane ride home or whatnot. Like, there's a lot of work you might want to do. It might be hundreds of pages long, right, this transcript, and you got to make sense of it. Again, you can use the AI writing assistant to help you here. So you can say, I want to do a transcript analysis. I want to, in this case, you can pick, again, one of the preset ones or do your own. We'll just do a deponent background and topic-based summary. And it's going to consume that transcript and generate from that information that you can then use to see it into your summary and then turn this into some work product that you can actually build upon, right? You'll see here it's going to take a little while to generate all the different things here, but you'll notice it's generating the structured output and it's citing the deposition, pages and line numbers, right? You can jump back to the deposition to get into that information, right? So here's a summary of that transcript, right? What this deponent talked about. And so again, you can see here how this can be really, really useful for you to get more value out of that transcript. You can extract facts. You can, again, look for discrepancies. There's a lot of different things you can do here. I can just insert that right in. And of course, I can share this draft with other people. I can collaborate with them on it. So lots and lots of exciting use cases here. So let's switch back, and let's bring up one of our users who's had experience with Writing Assistant. Hello. Thank you so much for being here, Jen. Great to have you with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm?
Sure. I'm with Baker & Schwartz. We're a boutique employment law firm here in the city, but we represent employees around California. Sometimes we handle some pretty complex matters, whistleblower claims, retaliation, discrimination, and harassment. Occasionally, we do also represent employers. I've been with the firm for several years and as an analyst, and I'm also the Everlaw administrator.
And you are an active participant in the beta, so thank you so much. Really critical to help us make the right decisions. So I know you're a smaller firm. You're going to be creative as a result. And I know you were early users of ChatGPT for some public documents. And then you also switched to Story Builder with Everlaw AI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience?
Yes, we definitely have to get creative. So one example was about a year ago, we had a case that had been on pause for quite some time, over a year. And my attorneys needed to get back up to speed pretty quickly. At that moment in time, the amount of cited case law was something like 150 odd different cases. And they asked me to create a study guide of sorts just to review those cases and then kind of try to focus on which ones were the ones that best bolstered our arguments, and then which ones to be on the lookout for from the other side. So one by one, I had them in Word, each case in a Word document, and I started uploading it to ChatGPT. I was really nervous about hallucinations, and I was asking it for a summary. This was all going on shortly after last year's summit, and I had seen a story builder demo using the writing assistant. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to see what Everlaw can do. So I was able to create 2 drafts, one for our side, one for theirs, and upload all of the relevant cases, all in a batch effort, which I appreciated. And then the writing assistant at that time was a little open-ended, so I really didn't know what to say. And I just, out of curiosity, was like, okay, which are the 3 strongest cases for our side? And it started spitting out some output. I flipped over to the opposing counsel draft and did the same. And then I was able to actually share some really relevant information with the attorneys.
So that's a very creative use of writing assistant. That's great. You also used it in another way that would have been a very tedious process in another matter. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, so recently we got served with 10 sets of RFPs and special interrogatories, and some of the RFPs had over 50 individual items. All told, it was amounting to 120 pages of just requests and about 500 items, all at once. And so I thought, okay, Everlaw has got to help me here. So I uploaded all of those requests, and I just asked for a high-level summary. Again, in the writing assistant, I said, summarize each one. I need to be able to pass this over to my attorneys so they can focus on the high-level stuff and not get bogged down in all the details. We could have totally given this to a junior attorney, or I might have gotten stuck with the task. But it would have taken a day or 2, and as a small firm, we have to be really, really careful about tying up our time like that. But we still have to be able to respond to sometimes big requests. So that's where the generative AI, and especially within Everlaw, can really help us out.
So you mentioned it would have taken a junior attorney maybe a day. How long did it take with the AI assistant?
It was spitting out stuff within a couple of minutes, and then the output was 2 pages as opposed to the 120. And so yeah, that was a significant cost and time savings.
Well, that's incredibly valuable, I think. It seems like you're thinking about your firm with a growth mindset, right? How do you use use technology to improve productivity? We think that's great. Obviously, we love to support that. Mm-hmm. So, in closing, what advice would you give to others that are just getting started with the writing assistant?
So, in my personal observation of the legal industry, and I'm not a lawyer, but there does seem to be an awful lot of tedium that's involved, a lot of monotonous tasking. And while that sort of thing is often necessary, it's not necessarily impactful. So my advice is when a really monotonous task comes up, that's when generative AI should come to mind, or Everlaw AI should come to mind. You can get creative in the writing assistant. You can literally just throw it out there and see what it comes back with. At that moment, Everlaw hasn't charged you anything. You haven't spent any credits or any dollars associated. You get a preview of the output, and if you like it, great. Then the credits are used. If you don't, you can try again and again and again until you get something useful. We all know that a blank screen is a much more difficult starting place versus a strong first draft. So get that strong first draft and go from there.
Thank you so much, Jen. Appreciate your time. All right. Another great practitioner's viewpoint there. So here you can see some of the ways GenAI is woven into Everlaw's litigation platform, right? We've focused on specific workflows that play to LLM strengths, that use the 4 corners of your documents, that have precise use cases and available context, and that you can verify the outputs of yourself right in line. So after your beta testing, the technology is now available to Everlaw users today. We want you to have it in your arsenal, right? Not as a replacement for your discovery workflows, but as a critical tool for augmenting them. So let's talk about pricing. Jen was talking about this a little bit. As you know, or as you may know, LLM technology is expensive. The development of the models, the GPUs needed for inference are pretty significant costs. They all factor into the cost of the service. So it is an add-on to the core platform. But given that constraint, we wanted to make a fair pricing model that aligns to the value you get from the platform. So much like our core per gigabyte pricing, The bigger your haystack, the more data you put in, the more value you get and the more money it costs. We created a model that's usage-based, right? So you only pay for what you use. You don't use it on a case, you don't pay it at all, anything. If you use it a lot, you pay more. We want it to be aligned to the value you get from that usage, right? So a summary of a document is obviously a lot less valuable than creating a whole memo. But then also to allude to something, which is if you look at this memo cost, well, $20 is really cheap if you get great output, and it's a waste of money if you don't get the output you like, right? You don't really know, there's some risk there. So one thing we did really intentionally is for that writing assistant is, as Jen mentioned, you can generate the outputs, and you don't have to pay until you click that insert button that puts it into the draft itself. That's our way of aligning with you to ensure that you're getting value out of what you're creating there. It allows you to experiment and get comfortable. And we'll eat the cost until it gives you good output, right? And that's something we're going to iterate on to make sure you're getting a ton of value from that kind of experience as well. All right, we also want to ensure that you feel comfortable getting to know, your smart interns. We do include a free trial. If you want to get access to the free trial, you can reach out to your customer success manager. So as a reminder, of course, you're still getting an experience that you can rely on, right? You can use this technology confidently, right? We talked about all the ways we build up that confidence, all the structural components of the design of the technology and the platform, and even the mental model shift and the validation you want to do. And then, of course, you get the privacy and security and control you need, right? You have zero data retention. Your data is never stored by model providers after the question's asked. Your data is never used to train models. The data is obviously encrypted, moving back and forth, and we do all the heavy security vendor vetting we do for any vendor getting access to your data. And on the control side, you of course get to choose. If you want to use this technology, you choose how much you want to spend. You can place global organizational limits or database-specific limits on spend. You can choose which users can use Everlaw AI or which database it can be used on, which capabilities you want to use. You'll get notifications of how many credits you're using. You get full reporting at the database user and event level, so you can associate credit usage to particular databases. So we want to provide all the kind of functional components that enable the use of this technology, right? It's not just clicking a button to get an answer. We know it's going to be a thing you implement kind of operationally, right, throughout your practice. We want to make sure you can do that well. All right, we actually do have one more thing. I don't have a black turtleneck like Steve Jobs, but this will have to be as close as I can get. One area where we felt large language models aren't quite up to the task is in canvassing massive amounts of data, right? Say a whole e-discovery corpus to answer specific questions, right? The context window, the amount of information you can feed an LLM when asking a specific question is limited. It's actually really big for most common use cases, and there's up to million token context windows, which is a really big deal for a lot of people. Not for our industry, where 1 million tokens is not very big compared to corpuses that are in the billions or trillions of bytes, right? So there are various techniques you can use to reduce the amount of data that needs to be sent to a large language model, to feed it kind of the important stuff out of the corpus that might be relevant to your question. And over the past year, we've been investigating a lot of those areas, and we've been building a solution that tries to incorporate the best techniques we found. And I'm excited to demonstrate today the ability to query your entire document corpus inside of Everlaw. So 1 second again. We have really good security, so my screen locks really fast, and I don't mind it. Let me get logged back in here. So I'll show you this thing, and I want to be clear that this is, if you can switch over here, thank you. This is in alpha. It's not even in beta. It's very, very preliminary. But I'm excited to show you today what's going on here. This is another opioids database. There's a lot of these out there. They've all been publicly released. It's about 1.4 million public documents. And it's modern data. And one thing we did is we removed kind of the media articles in this document data set. Sometimes there's like cheating involved when you have a perfect summary of the answer. That's not really how real cases get litigated, right? We want the core documents. So we filtered those out. And what you get, and this is the non-media set here, about 1.32 million documents. And so you can run what we call a project Q&A right now, the document, an oracle you can query about your entire corpus. On any particular subset or the entire set of documents you have, right? And so you can ask simple questions. Let's just say, who invented opioids? And it's going to query this corpus for that information, right? It's going to find the documents that might answer the question. It's going to winnow them down to a set of facts that it can then synthesize to try to answer your question, right? So it's going to run. It takes a little while, by the way. This is not an immediate process. It has to do a lot of work. But you can see here it's identified some documents. There's some resources here, and it's actually provided an answer, right? The active agent was by this German pharmacist in 1805. It's going to cite these 2 documents and the specific text in the documents. So you can go right to them. And the resources here basically will show you all the thought process behind it. Right? There's 119 documents that thought might be relevant. You can go look at them. You can show you all the relevant facts it's found, and actually score them for you. Sometimes you'll learn interesting things here. And it'll show you the facts it used in its response, which is like the specific text here that it's using to generate these facts. This is a relatively simple question. You might ask something more sophisticated. Let's say, how do opioids work? It's going to get to work on that. And again, it's going to really use only the 4 corners of the documents in your corpus. I'm going to show you some examples of that here. In this case, this is a complicated question. All right? It's going to have to synthesize information from a bunch of different sources and give you a basis. So, look, you're not really doing this kind of research here. Hopefully, you can go to other places. But I want to give you a baseline example before we dive into a couple of examples that are tied to this particular matter, right? So it's finding the top 50 important documents here. It's going to generate a response from 106 most relevant facts. You can follow along. And it's going to give you this kind of detailed response, how they work with citations, right? And it's going to cite the resources, which are a bunch of documents in here that explain all the things that matter. You can see the facts used in the generation of this response. You can get to the source documents itself, right? I want to really emphasize the idea that this isn't just the LLM telling you what it knows, right? There's a real danger in that, right? We don't want to rely on it for its embedded knowledge. Its knowledge may not be correct. It could be hallucinating. We want to tie it to evidence you have in your case. So if I ask it a question, why is the sky blue? We're going to see, right? So any LLM could answer this question for you. That's been trained. A large language model has been trained on plenty of reasons to explain why the sky is blue with its own knowledge. That's not helpful to us here, right? We want to see whether the database could provide the answer. In this case, it can't. So it's able to say it doesn't know, right? It's able to say it doesn't have the information to answer this question, which is really important. A lot of large language model interactions are kind of eager to please and give you stuff you want to use. That's not helpful in this context. So we've done a lot of work to ensure that it can basically tell you, like, hey, look, I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's not supported by evidence in this case, in the 4 corners of your documents. It's funny. I was asking other random questions just to try it out last night. I was asking, what's the population of Canada? Knowing that that's a fact it could know. It turns out there are some documents in here that do talk about the population of Canada, and it cited them. I can show you that if you want. But I'll also show about you can obviously ask questions about your case. I didn't want to try to spell Mallinckrodt, so I'm copying and pasting here. But you might actually want to dig into specifics about your case, right? At the very beginning of the case, you might have some broad questions about, hey, what are the sales tactics this drug manufacturer is using to push these opioids, right? And then you could have it get to work and identify those sales tactics. And by the way, you can jump into any particular document and view it. You can aggregate these documents. It's all deeply integrated into Everlaw, right? So you can view them in the in results table. You can add them to the story builder. You can batch them out for review. You can do whatever you want with these documents, right? So here we have a pretty detailed response of all the things that Mallinckrodt could be doing or has been doing with citations to particular components, right, of this matter, cited with real evidence here. We have all the resources it used. You can look at a bunch of these facts and facts used in the response and so on. So again, you can see some of the power of the tool. I'm going to skip this one, but we can, in the interest of time, but there's many questions you can ask as you kind of learn more about the matter and develop more of an opinion about what's going on. Very targeted questions, right, that are talking about specific concepts you've learned. So in that sense, the tool can kind of grow with you, right? As you get a greater understanding, you can target your questions better. It's going to go back to that repository. But I skipped to the last one because I know we started a little late and I want to be on time. But this last one is, hey, look, we're gotten to the point where we think that there's some bad actors here. Who are some of the bad actors? And I want to call this out, actually, by the way. Here's an example. I did this on purpose. Here's an example of a case where it's giving you some answers, right? And it can show you why, the answers it got. Top prescribers for the pharmacies in southern Missouri were these 2 doctors. Well, that's not exactly what I asked, right? So I want to be clear, like, you got to keep your brain on, right, when you're doing this stuff. But it actually will show you all the generated facts it consulted. And you're going to find here there's a bunch of other facts that are relevant, right? Other doctors' names will start to come out, and you can actually query this and start looking at this as a resource to say, like, here are people I didn't know about, right? Or facts I didn't know about, people that, these particular doctors that might have been prescribing, right? So it gives you the set of tools, it explains its thought process to you, and it's going to be a partner, right? It's not going to just go snap its, your fingers or its virtual, Skynet fingers and just do the thing for you, but it's going to be a partner that you can really use to expand your understanding of the case, to dive into specific pieces of evidence, and to chase down maybe some interesting leads or explore new opportunities here. So again, this is an alpha. It's going to come out in beta, we think, in Q1 of next year, and we're excited to get people using it. We are taking our time with this. We've put a huge amount of effort and research into this kind of experience, which is meant to be very, very grounded in the facts. It's meant to show its work, to be a partner to you, rather than something that's just delivering an answer. We want it to get, again, the best answer it can find. So we're excited about that. Stay tuned. So let's get back to closing out the presentation here. And so I'll just say, look, our job here is to be your partner, right? We want to be the best technology provider you have. Our job is to provide you cutting-edge technology, all the tools you need, keeping up with the latest conceivable innovations, as well as providing you the best practices for how to use these technologies. But we're never going to shill them, right? We want you to go in eyes wide open with our support and find the tools and workflows that work best for you, right? So as long as we provide you that best technology and the set of best practices, we feel like we want to be that partner you can rely on to get unbiased judgment and advice and insight on how to use this technology. And GenAI, of course, is the next big technology. We want to make sure at the forefront here. I've spent an hour talking to you about it. We're going to provide you these tools. But again, we want to talk not just about all the great stuff, but the caveats and the challenges, so we can go together to use this technology as best as possible. It is technology that's going to change the law. So we do encourage you to chat with folks who've used it, many folks in this room. Encourage you to use the free trial, and then consult with us if you're interested in using it further, right? Now, I've spent my time today talking about the great set of generative AI features that we're delivering, but that's just one part of what we've been working on. You may be surprised to know that all these GenAI efforts represent only 20% of our R&D efforts in the past year. The other 80% is going on all the other areas of the platform that matter to you, real functionality that makes a difference. And we've got a lot more to show you. And we think that's really, really important, right? It's a critical, valuable tool, but it's one tool of many in solving a very challenging and thorny problem, right? So fundamentally, it's our job to provide all these technologies to you. Whatever the curves in the road that may lie ahead for you, we're here for you, and we're excited to bring this technology to you. So thank you so much.